I want to thank the New Jersey Highlands Coalition for sponsoring this, hosting this program. And thank you all who have joined us here this evening. This is only the second time I've given this presentation online. I've given it numerous times in person to live audiences, but it's a little bit different experience. So hopefully it will work out. There should be a chat session going. If you have any questions during the program, please ask them via the chat. And then at the end of the program, Elliot will read the questions to me and Joe, and we'll answer them for you. But thank you again very much for joining us. So the Morris Canal was one of two towpath canals that we had in New Jersey. The other one was the Delaware and Hudson Canal that went through central New Jersey. And it was a little bit more typical of the canals that are across the country. The Morris Canal went across northern New Jersey, and it was actually revolutionary. And we'll tell you why that is. Now, the story of the Morris Canal started about 1822. And to give you an idea of how early that is in our nation's history, two of our most prominent forefathers, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, were still alive at that point. But it was during this time, during this year, that George McCulloch, who was a prominent, wealthy businessman from Morristown, McCulloch Hall, you probably heard of, was fishing on Lake Hopatcong, then called Great Pond, as the legend has it. And he struck upon the idea of using Lake Hopatcong as the water source to build a canal across northern New Jersey. Now, why did we need a canal in the first place? Well, there became a need in the 1820s as we started to move into the Industrial Revolution to transport cargo such as coal, iron ore, other cargo across the state. At that point, roads were in very bad condition, and a horse and cart could only pull so much cargo. A waterway, you could pull much more, about 50 times the amount. So this is why canals were really exploding in the early 1800s. So the first thing that had to be done was to raise the level of Lake Hopatcong. The picture you see here is Lake Hopatcong as we know it today. That is not what nature gave us. That actually originally consisted of two bodies of water, Great Pond, which was the lower part, and a small little pond called Little Pond up here. The final, the lake was raised several times in the 1700s for a forge that was there, Brooklyn Forge. And it was raised the final 5 feet for the Morris Canal. That connected to two bodies of water and created many of the coves that we have there. So you may have heard that Hopatcong is a Lenni Lenape word for either Lake of Many Coves or Honey Water of Many Coves, and that is total nonsense. Most of these coves did not exist back in the time of the native people. And any linguist will tell you that does not translate from a Lenni Lenape language. So how was this canal financed? The canal was not owned by the state until the abandonment. It was owned by a private company called the Morris Canal and Banking Company. This was created in 1824, and they financed the canal by selling 20,000 shares of stock to raise $2 million to finance the building of the canal. Probably wouldn't even finance the plans today, but that successfully financed the construction of the canal. It also caused George McCulloch, who was the founder, to disassociate himself with the canal. Now, the reason was that he, as a wealthy businessman, and there's many back then, he did not like or trust banks. And so he wanted nothing to do with a banking company. That ended up being a smart decision for him financially, because except for a few years during the 1860s, the Morris Canal and Banking Company worked at a loss. So it was not a successful financial undertaking, but it did fund the canal. So the canal was built, it opened November 4th, 1831. And at that point, the canal went from Phillipsburg on the Delaware River and ended in Newark. 5 years later, then it was extended to Jersey City. So in 1836, for the first time, you could transport cargo from Pennsylvania all the way over to New York City. Now, if you look at the bottom of the screen, you see all the towns that the canal went through. Many of these towns existed before the canal, but were greatly developed after the canal was built. Some of them do exist because of the canal. Any town in northern New Jersey where it has port in the name, Port Colden, Port Murray, Port Morris, all exist because of the canal. They were ports along the canal. Wharton was originally called Port Orem, so it exists before the canal. Boonton, where the Highlands Coalition is home, it's kind of a hybrid. It did exist before the canal, but it existed in a different location. It existed underneath what is now the Jersey City Reservoir. It was moved to its current location because of the Morris Canal and also to build the Boonton Iron Works. So while it did predate the canal, it exists where you know it today because of the Morris Canal. So the big challenge to building a canal across northern New Jersey is the New Jersey Highlands. And the Highlands Coalition knows all about the Highlands, but for you on this listening in who may not be aware, the Highlands refers to the section of northwest New Jersey, which is very mountainous, and this is actually part of the Appalachian mountain chain. I myself live on top of an Appalachian mountain. I live on top of Schooley's Mountain. When I go out of state and say, yeah, I'm from New Jersey and I live on top of an Appalachian mountain, people look at you like you're nuts because they don't think of New Jersey as being a mountainous place. But the Highlands is, and this is what caused the great challenge for those who were designing the Morris Canal across the state. Now, if you look at the chart at the bottom, you can see that Mr. McCullough had an estimate of how much elevation had to be overcome, but he was way off. He estimated it would only be about 300 feet to get across the state, and it was actually 1,674 feet. And we get there by Lake Hopatcong is 914 feet above tide level, and then it's another 760 feet to the Delaware River Valley. So from the canal going all the way across the state, it had to overcome 1,674 feet of elevation. How do we do that? Well, we'll start with the most conventional method, and that was use locks. Locks were in use in many canals across the area, still are today. If you visit a canal, you've probably seen a lock, maybe even through the canal lock. There are 23 lift locks on the Morris Canal. Locks very simple. You have two walls, you have gates on each side, and you have valves. You want to raise a boat up, you open the valves in the upper canal, lets the water in, raises the boat up, just like in a bathtub. If you want to lower the boat down, you open the valves, the lower part of the lock, it lets the water out and lowers the boat down. So 23 locks on the Morris Canal. Now, here's a couple of pictures of locks that are on the Morris Canal. The first one, the top one is Lock 2 east of Wharton. We're going to see a little bit later that this is a preserved lock. But what you see here is a boat going through. We love this photo because it shows a lot was going on. You got the lock tender here operating the gate. You got the mule tender who's coming forward to get feed out of the box. The captain's opening the feed box to give to the mules. Mules often were fed while boats are locking through. Now we have these two young ladies here who obviously just returning from a trip to the store. They got a basket and a jug with them. And there's a little bit of debate who these girls were. Were they daughters of the captain, or are they about to get on the boat and continue on with them? Or were they just passerbys who were watching the boat lock through? We don't know either explanation is plausible. Now, in the cabin of the boat, you might notice this white object here. Keep that in mind. We're going to tell you a little bit later what that is, but every canal boat had one of those. Lower photo is Lock 1 East in Ledgewood. This is actually part of a park that we just opened about a year and a half ago, Riggs Park, and this is looking towards Main Street Ledgewood Bridge. Today, if you looked at this view, you would see Route 10 running right across there, and Outback Steakhouse would be right on your right. So Ledgewood has changed drastically from very rural area to very developed now, highways and strip malls and gas stations and so on. So there was an issue with locks. They had their limitation. They were okay for overcoming a elevation change for about 10 feet. But going across northern New Jersey, you had much larger elevation changes. So what happens if you have an elevation change of, say, 90 feet? Well, if it takes you 10 minutes, you could do this. And this is called a flight of locks, where you stack locks up like stairs, one after another. The problem here is if you had to go overcome an elevation of 90 feet, and it takes 10 minutes to get through each lock, you have 9 locks, that's going to take you an hour and a half to overcome 90 feet of elevation. That's a lot of time to get through with such a, not a very big elevation. Now, what this photo shows here is natural flight of locks in England. This is the Kennet and Avon Canal, and it's actually a flight of 29 locks. It overcomes 237 feet of elevation. Actually takes boats 5 hours to go through all these locks. So with all the large elevation changes in the Morris Canal, this would not be a good way to go. They had to come up with a better way to overcome these large elevation changes. And here's how they did it, the inclined plane. Simply put, an inclined plane is a hill. The boats were pulled up and down it on these things called cradles. And the cradles are on railroad tracks, and they're being pulled up and down via cable. Now, the inclined planes went through a couple of different designs. If you look at this first illustration, that was the original design, and it used a big wheel similar to what you would see in a mill. And the water came in the top, turned the wheel, and that pulled the boats up and down. That was good for pulling boats that weighed maybe 20 tons. As demand increased and more cargo had to be pulled in the Morris Canal, they redesigned the whole canal, the locks, and the inclined planes. And if you look at the diagram in the middle, this was the second design that came about in the 1840s. And this would be the design that would continue until the canal was abandoned. And the way this would work is you would have, this is the upper canal, the water would come down a flume, down a huge pipe called a penstock, and it would turn a Scotch turbine. That would create the power to turn the drum, to pull the cables, to pull these cradles up and down the canal. Now, how big were these turbines? Well, if you go to Hopatcong State Park, there's a preserved one there. You see there's a picture of me next to the turbine. It's pretty big. So the force of water and gravity turned this large turbine, and that's what turned the drum to create the power to pull the boats up and down the inclined planes. At the bottom of the slide, you see a schematic for how the cables work. This is a schematic for a 2-track plane. There's actually only 3 inclined planes that have double sets of tracks. All of the 20 other inclined planes were only single tracks. So the boats had to take turns going up and down. 23 inclined planes total were built on the Morris Canal. Here's a picture of a couple of them. The upper photo shows plane 7 East in Boonton, very notorious inclined plane. And what we see here is a boat has just gone onto the cradle, and it's starting its journey up the inclined plane. You can see the water on the cradle where it's being pulled up. The cradles went totally into the water, just like a trailer in a boat. Now, I'll tell you a funny story about the Boonton plane. In the latter part of the canal, these boats were pulled up by Roblin cable, very thick cable. Prior to that, they were pulled up by chain. Chain was not very strong and had a tendency to break. So the story goes, one of these boats was being pulled up this plane when it was back in the days of chain. Got about 3/4 of the way up, and the chain broke. The whole cradle car went flying back down the plane, splashed into the water, and ended up on the bank of the canal. Well, this was a little concerning because the canal boat captain's wife and kids were in the cabin. So all the men who were there rushed in, and they pulled them out, and they said, "Are you all right?" And fortunately, they were. They asked the captain's wife, they said, "Madam, this must have been a terribly frightful experience for you." And the woman answered, she said, these are exact words, she said, "Well, I thought it was going rather swiftly but I just figured that's how the thing worked. So she thought it worked like a toboggan ride or a log flume ride. The bottom photo you see, this is taken at Plane 5 East in Wharton. It's taken from the helm of the inspection boat called the Katie Kelly. It's looking down the plane. So this would be your view as a captain going down the plane. The inclined planes overcame elevations from 33 to 98 feet. And because they were used rather than lock flights, they saved over 18 hours on a trip. The trip took 5 days total across the state. So what happened to these inclined planes? Well, as soon as they were built on the Morris Canal, and the Morris Canal was the first place, engineers came from all over the world to find out how this was done. How did you make a canal that could climb mountains? And so after it was studied, you started seeing these inclined planes built all over the world, Europe, Japan, everywhere. Sadly, there are no operating inclined planes in the United States. In fact, the Morris Canal was the only one where they existed law. But operating ones still exist in Europe. And you see this one is the Elblag Canal in Poland, still in operation, and it still takes tourist boats up and down the inclined plane. So if you wanted to actually ride an inclined plane, this is where you go. A year ago, we had a gentleman from the Elblag Canal Society come to our program meeting and tell us about this inclined plane. He had come to New Jersey because he knew the Morris Canal was where inclined planes began, and he wanted to travel across the state and view all the sites of the inclined planes. Spoke very little English, so a couple times the police were called, but he was able to explain that he was just doing historic research, and they let him go. Great gentleman, and he put on a really wonderful presentation about the Elblag Canal inclined planes. Okay, so lock and plane to every lock, 23, actually, including guard locks, 36 locks, 23 inclined planes. Every single one of them had tenders that operated them. And the tenders were simply men and women who operated the lock and operated the canal when they came through. The top view shows lock 2 West in Mount Olive, west of Stanhope. This was known as Fluke's Lock. And Mr. Fluke spent his days on a work scow, so he allowed his wife and 4 daughters to operate the lock. This is one of his daughters opening the upper gate. The lock tenders would provide a house right there on the lock and plane, and that's where they would live. And they were on call from sunup to sundown whenever the locks and inclined planes were in use. Now, of course, they had to go about their business, they had to go about their chores and work in their gardens and had some lunch. But the canal boat captains didn't want to have to wait. So they wanted these tenders to be there ready to bring them through. So remember that white object I talked about a few slides before in the boat? That was this, and that's a conch shell. Every canal boat had a conch shell on their boat. And the reason was when they got about a half mile from the lock with the inclined plane, they would do this. Anyway, never works much when I do it, but you would blow it and that sound could be heard for a half mile. That let the tenders know that a boat was coming, and they would stop what they were doing and get out to their lock or inclined plane to bring the boats through. Because time was money for canal boat captains. They did not want to wait. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that Lake Hopatcong was the main source of water. There are many secondary sources, rivers, streams. The canal followed rivers all the way across the state, and in many places they had to cross rivers. If they had to cross a river, there are 2 ways they could do it. The first was to navigate across the river, their boats, so they could go across the river. To navigate a river, though, you have to have a few things. First of all, you have to have a dam to create slack water. It'd be very hard to pull a boat across the river against the current. And you would need a bridge for the mules and tenders to get across. So here you see a boat at Waterloo. It's just descended plane 4 west. It's coming out of its cradle. It's about to go across the river. The mules are on the bridge pulling it across the river. And then the other thing you needed is you needed a guard lock. and this is the guard lock at the other side of the river. And that's a little bit different from a lift lock in that its main purpose was to control the water from the river into the canal. And so here we see a boat being helmed by a woman coming through Lock 3 West and back into the canal at Waterloo. Now, the lock at Waterloo was kind of unique because it was made up of stone walls, which were conventional, and this wood aqueduct. Now, why was this aqueduct needed? Well, this creek you see here was actually a raceway that pre-existed the canal. Waterloo Village was originally a forge, Andover Forge, and this tail race existed. So when they built this lock, they had to get the lock to get over the tail race. So it was partially an aqueduct. So at Waterloo, you see two examples of getting across waterways, navigation and through an aqueduct. By the way, we'll see the same image a little bit later in a current view. It looks pretty much the same, except all these open fields are now thick woods. One of the reasons they had to build the canal was because a lot of these trees were taken down, and so coal was needed as a fuel source. Okay, so we talked about aqueducts being the second way to get across a river, and here we see two of the most notorious aqueducts. The top one is Lincoln Park. It was the longest at 275 feet, almost the length of a football field. This is gone to now, but if you go to Lincoln Park, there's a park there called Aqueduct Park. There's signage that tells the story of this aqueduct. And if you look around on the shores on both Lincoln Park and Passaic County side, you'll find the abutments to this aqueduct. The one at the bottom was the Little Falls Aqueduct that went over the Passaic River. It was the most impressive. And this was the largest man-made object that existed on the Morris Canal. This was blown up right after the abandonment. They took a bunch of explosives and blew the thing up. And we have photographs of that. Today, there's a water pipe that goes across here. So if you visit Morris Canal Park in Little Falls, you can walk down to the river's edge and see the pipe. And that's where this Little Falls Aqueduct went. Okay. So what were the Morris Canal boats like? Well, we talked about I mentioned a DNR canal. Big difference between a DNR and the Morris Canal is DNR was built to handle boats of all kinds of shapes and sizes. The Morris Canal was built to only handle a boat of a specific size. And here you see it. The Morris Canal boats were 90 feet long, 10.5 feet wide, but they were in two hinged sections, 45 feet apart. Why did they have to be hinged? Well, because of the inclined planes. When the boats went over the inclined planes, they had to go over the prow, so they had to be able to bend. One long boat would break the keel and it wouldn't work. The cradles were also two pieces too, as they had to bend. Now these boats were limited. They cannot be longer, they cannot be wider than 90 feet, 10.5 feet wide. And that's because of the locks. The locks were 95 by 11 feet. So the boats were designed to fit in these locks. Since the boats had the 10.5 foot beam, the locks were 11 foot wide. You only had 3 inches on each side. So it was a very, very tight fit to get this boat in lock. And you can see by this picture, 3 inches on each side. This photo also shows a good view of the stern of the boat. You got the tiller here. That's how the boat was steered. Here's the cabin. 769. That's how the canal company kept track of its boats. To navigate a canal boat, it took a minimum of 2 people. There was the captain who stood in the stern and steered the boat. That's why we call it a boat, not a barge. And a mule tender whose job was to walk alongside the mules, keep them going. Who are these mule tenders? Mostly they were young men who employed as young as 8 or 10 years old. They would walk along the mules to keep them going. They walked 20 miles a day. If the canal boat captain had a family, he would employ his son or daughter to work as a mule tender. Now, here are 2 women who were both mule tenders. They were both daughters of the canal boat captain, and they both worked as mule tenders. In fact, this month's newsletter, which you can get on our website, wrote a story about the two of them, Mrs. Van Horn and Mrs. Mann, and they both, in the book Tales of Boatmen Told, which James Lee wrote back in the 70s, he interviewed these women when they were elderly women, and they talked about what it was like to live and work on the canal. And there's a couple interesting quotes here. Mrs. Van Horn, daughter of James Campbell, said, "Canalers helped one another. They were good, kind. They were very poor people that had their boats, but they were good to each other." And then a separate interview with Mrs. Mann was asked about when one of her mules died, and she said, "We borrowed off Mr. Jim Campbell." So when Mrs. Mann's, their family mule died, it was Captain Campbell, Mrs. Van Horn's father, that they borrowed a mule from in order to continue on their journey. So this shows the extended family that existed among canalers on the canal, on the Morris Canal. So here we have a very good photo that shows what life is about on the canal. You have a captain's wife is cooking dinner. You see the stove here where she's cooking on. She's frying something up in a pan while the captain steers the boat. We see a pot of water here. That was water that was boiled, probably either to cook or to do laundry. There's some linen that's hanging out here to dry. Here's the basket she would take into stores to buy provision. And this was life for 9 months out of the year on a canal boat. This is how the canalers lived day after day. They slept in the cabin here, and most of the activities were in the hinges between the two feed boxes, because that is where the most amount of space was on a canal boat. So usually the captain rented his boat from the Morris Canal and Banking Company. He might own it if he saved up enough money. But whether he owned it or rented it, he was responsible for the upkeep of it. Here we see a photo of a canal captain, or actually the tender, repairing a leak on a boat. Now, since the Klein Plains existed, you had a very handy dry dock. As you were pulling the boats up, you could stop them at the top, and that was a good way to repair the leaks in the boat. So here we see the mule tenders working on the leak, captain's watching from the boat, and of course, anytime you're doing something like that, that's a good time to feed your mules. So the mules have their bags on, they're eating. So everyone's busy here, and you see the doggy is busy too in this photo. Okay, whether a captain owned or rented a boat, he had to provide the mules. Team of mules would cost the captain about $150. It was a very, very large amount of money in those days. So a captain would have to save a lot of money to buy these mules if he wanted to be a canal boat captain. And he would treat these mules very well. They were his bread and butter, and he was also judged by how he kept his mules. So he would feed them and water them, keep them well brushed. And this would usually be the mule tender's job to do that. So if you were a mule tender and the captain wanted to leave at 5 a.m., you would be up at 4 a.m. to get the mules out of the stables, get them cleaned up, brushed, get their harness on, fed, all that. Mules were not kept on the boat. They were kept on stables. There were stables all up and down the canal that were provided by the Canal and Banking Company. Now, since canal boats had very little storage and no refrigeration, there were canal stores all up and down the canal. And like these two you see here, they're usually located right on the banks of the canal, so the boats can pull up and load right into them, just kind of like a drive-through. These two are both stores that are architecturally intact. Smith store at Waterloo and the Perry store at Port Murray. And they're both examples of boats that were, stores that were right on the canal. Smith store is a museum today. Perry store, I think, is a woodworking shop. So it's one of the few canal stores that still exists as an operating business today. This is the King store in Ledgewood. And here you see an interior shot. This is what they reproduced, a modern shot. But the good thing about this shot is it shows the store not only as a place where you can buy goods, but a gathering place too. Because the canalers, when they would stop to get their provisions, they would all talk to each other and gossip and smoke their pipes and drink their coffee and catch up on things. Smith's store was located right across the street from a basin, right heading west before two inclined planes. So it was a very strategic place to put a canal stores. Their boats would be waiting there, so that would be a good time to get their provisions and to also catch up on things. So what caused the decline of the Morris Canal? Well, the answer is right here in this picture. The choo-choo train put the canal out of business. As mentioned, it took about 5 days to get across the canal. A train could get across in 5 hours. A canal boat carried about, three train cars of coal carried. So if you had a locomotive pulling 30 cars, that would be the equivalent of 10 canal boats getting across the state at 5 hours. So it was a foregone conclusion about the 1860s on that the railroad would put the canal out of business. It wasn't a matter if, it was a matter when. So in the latter days of the canal, which most of these photographs date from, the canal and the railroad worked in conjunction with each other, not only to transport cargo, but to transport people. What you see here is a photo taken at Lake Hopatcong Station. And what's happening here is these are boats, launches, that they were called, that are going to transport people from the train station to the various resorts around Lake Hopatcong. Because at this point, Lake Hopatcong was really coming up as a big resort facility. So people were coming out from the city to vacation there. These were the black line launches. They would come down the feeder canal to the main canal, come down to the train station, pick the people up and take them up to the lake, to the resorts. Now there are two competing lines, the black line and the white line. Here you see the photos at the bottom. The black line are almost like in a race together. The black line used the canal, came right down to the train station. The white line did not, but came to the lower part of the lake. So if you were taking a white line steamer, you'd have to go from the train station, up the stairs to the station, out the front, and then across the road to get to where the dock was for the white line. If you took a black line launch, you would just have to cross over the platform at the rail station. So the question you might ask is, why would anyone take a white line steamer at all? Well, the black line had to go up the canal feeder and through Brooklyn Lock, which was the lock that went from the canal into the lake. Now, going through a lock was typical for a captain. They went through locks every day. For a vacationer, it was a different experience, and it was a very scary experience. So they didn't like to do it. So what I want to read you is, this is an account from 1890. It's in a journalist, Gustav Kobe, and he wrote this after he made the passage through Brooklyn Lock. This is verbatim. The passage through the lock is an interesting experience. The lower gates are open and a miniature steamer glides into the lock, the gates closing behind it. It is now imprisoned in a narrow passage. On either side are high dripping walls, in the front and the stern of the closed gates. There is a sudden roar of rushing, surging water. The launch, meaning the boat, lunges half forward, half upward, the screw adding to the turmoil. The lunging continues, and the swashing and surging water now lifting the launch by stern and by the prow. The action of those who had not been through the lock before is a study. The babies cry, the women grab the nearest man by the arm, the girls are prettily flustered, and the men endeavor to be calm. The passengers who have made the passage before look amused, and the only persons who are absolutely indifferent are the captain and the engineer. So that was what it was like for these vacationers to go through Brooklyn Lock into Lake Hopatcong. So there are many people who are responsible for the abandonment in the Morris Canal, but the one person who gets credit more than anyone else is Hudson Maxim. Hudson Maxim was a wealthy landowner who owned land a large part of the western shore of Lake Hopatcong, and he was the driving force behind the abandonment because he was afraid that Lake Hopatcong would be used as a water source for the Morris Canal, and that would deplete the lake. That, by the way, is why the DNR is still in existence today, is because it is used as a water source. but he led the abandonment of the canal. So for the Lake Hopatcong people, he's the big hero. He saved Lake Hopatcong. For the Canal Society people, he's kind of looked at as the nemesis of it. But what's interesting is if you visit the state park today, Hopatcong State Park, there's a monument to Hudson Maxim. And ironically, the monument sits right in the former path of the canal, which is kind of funny. The photo at the bottom shows his very impressive boathouse that he had in Lake Hopatcong. That no longer exists. It was blown up. But you see this turret over next to it. That was his workshop, and that still exists. Okay, so that's the history of the canal. Let me just talk briefly about the Morris Canal Greenway. What that is a collab, and Elliot touched a little bit on this. Morris Canal Greenway is a collaborative effort between municipalities, counties, states, and private organizations like the Highlands Coalition, and obviously the Canal Society, to preserve assets on the Morris Canal, to reopen trails on the Morris Canal, and to educate you, the public, on the history of the Morris Canal. What we're doing here this evening is part of that effort too. But I just want to show you some of the things that you can see on the Morris Canal Greenway. Now that state and county parks are open, a lot of these places are open for you to explore. There are a few watered sections of the Morris Canal left, not a lot. Two of them were one at Wharton Forest Park, a very nice section of watered canal. Waterloo Village also has a small watered section of canal. This you see is our canal boat. It's called the Canal Explorer. We do offer rides usually in the summer at Waterloo, and then at Wharton's Canal Day in August. I don't know whether we'll be able to do it this year, but hopefully we can. And there are also some good locks to look at. Lock 2 East in Wharton is the only preserved lock. This was the historic photo I showed before, the two young ladies. That's a great place to visit and see the preserved lock. This is the old lock tender's house, which is also going to be preserved. It's in ruins now. And then if you visit Waterloo Village, you have Lock 3 West, which was the lock we saw before with the lady piloting the boat through. As I said, the view looks mostly the same as before. Difference is the wooded section and the aqueduct has now been filled in. There are a couple of really good inclined plane sites to see. If you go to Ledgewood, there's plane 2 East, which is one of the better inclined planes. You could visit and walk up. It's very close, easy to get to, close to the parking lot. These are called sleeper stones here. That's where the rails were attached to. The white structure is the turbine chamber. That's where that large turbine sat. This was the bypass flume to the right, where the water came down, when the plane was no longer in use, and where the water came from the turbine chamber. That's an excellent inclined plane to visit. Plane 9 West in Warren County is another great one. This is the plane tender's home. They also usually offer tours second Sunday of the month, April through October. I don't know whether they'll be able to do it this year or not because of COVID-19. Canal stores, a couple good ones, King Store in Ledgewood, Smith Store in Waterloo. Both can be visited, both museums. I don't know when they'll be open this year. A lot of Greenway trails. These are two. Hackettstown Kuipers Park is a really good one, about a mile long. Alamucci Park, Warren County, we have a trail that goes from Bilby Road to Waterloo in Alamucci Mountain Park. These are all great to explore. We're working on putting together a list of these. If you go to our website and read our newsletter, though, we've detailed a lot of these trails. Replica Morris Canal boat. If you go to Breadlock Park down in Warren County, Route 57, they built a replica size canal boat. You could walk on the deck, see what it was like to live on a canal boat. There's a little cabin they built. This is what the cabin looked like with the 2 bunks. This is out in the open, so you can visit it any day, sunrise to sunset. And then we have a real canal boat. Story behind this, real briefly, 2016, they were raising a house at the Highlands in down by Sandy Hook. they found an actual replica canal boat. They donated it to the Canal Society of New Jersey, and we brought it up to Waterloo Village. And the bow section here is now on display at Waterloo Village. It's one of the exhibits there. Hopefully, if the village opens up this year, you'll be able to come and see it. But it tells the whole story about not only canal boats in general, but how this boat was found. And the story is very, very interesting story. So that's my presentation. Here's my contact info. Here's my email. If you want to email me about anything in the canal, any questions, I'll be glad to answer it. Anything else you want to know, I'll be glad to answer that too. Here's our website, canalsocietyNJ.org. A lot of great information on the canals there. Information on our events are there. We have our newsletters online. If you want to sign up to receive our emails or join the Canal Society, you can do that. And if you're a Facebook person, we have our Facebook page, Canal Society NJ. Please like us, follow us, all kinds of great information on events and other things on our Facebook page. So thank you all for coming to this, and we will now open it up for questions.
Well, thank you, Tim, for talking for 40 minutes straight. I think you need a break. We have some questions from the viewers, and maybe we should kick these over to Joe, so you can drink some water and those vocal pipes. How are elected for canal boats? Because not all of them were Phillipsburg to Newark or Jersey City. Some, I guess it depended upon the weight of their cargo, etc. How did they go about doing that, Joe?
What was the first part of that question again?
How were fees collected for the canal boats to travel?
Some of your words are being cut off, Elliot.
I'll try again. How are fees collected to transport?
Okay. The major cargo in the canal was coal, and those coal boats were charged by permit, and they were weighed at several different places along the canal. There were scales that actually built into the inclined planes where the canals could be, where the boats could be weighed, and the cargo was charged to the shipper accordingly. There were lots of smaller cargoes. Iron ore was shipped going west, coal was shipped going east. There were lots of smaller cargoes. We actually have several copies of the toll rates, but exactly how the mechanism for determining the weights of small, short-run cargoes, we're really not sure how that worked. There's lots of stuff about day-to-day operation of the canal that nobody thought anybody would be interested in. And so you might think that we know it all. Well, we don't. We constantly are finding out new things and answering questions, but there's always more questions than answers.
Okay.
So my answer is we're not really clear about exactly how that mechanism worked.
Okay. Well, we have more questions coming in. How did they patch a leak in a canal boat? Was it pine tar or what did they use? Do you know? Did you hear the question?
I did, yes. Not being a sailor, I'm not sure I have a good answer for that one either. The boats had to come out of the water at every inclined plane, so that was an opportunity to patch them. And so some tar or some oakum, which is a fibrous hemp material, was hammered into a crack or between the boards to keep the boats from leaking. By the time most of the pictures that we have of the Morris Canal were taken in the early 1900s, most of the boats were in pretty poor condition, and so a lot of them looked pretty ratty. And so they lots of holes and lots of repairs are required to keep them afloat.
Okay. There's a lot of questions coming in, so I'm going to try to ask them in the sequence that they've been asked. What was it like to dig a section of the canal?
Hard.
Laborers were involved. Did they use hand shovels? What went into digging that ditch?
To understand this kind of thing, you have to erase most of the things you know about the modern world. This was the age, the age of a man's work was $1 a day, hard physical labor, and so nobody was waiting around for them to invent power tools to dig a canal. And so picks and shovels, wheelbarrows, horse-drawn scoops were used, and lots of elbow grease and back work. It was hard work, but this is the kind of people were born to that kind of work, and it was the first version of the Morris Canal when the canal was being dug in the 1820s. It was mostly local labor. The Irish came later and worked on the canal at the time of the potato famine, but the canal was built in sections. So if you wanted to be a canal contractor, you could apply to be awarded a section of canal. You'd have to sign a contract for how much it was going to cost, and then you would hire your laborers, provide your horsepower, and you would build your section of canal and make sure it connected up to the next guy's section of canal.
Okay. And if your vocal cords are significantly rested and lubricated, Tim, feel free to chime in.
Okay.
Next question, is why was the corporation organized as a banking corporation?
I'll take that one.
Okay.
In the 1820s, it wasn't really quite sure how internal improvements were going to work. That's one of those things that we all learned in History 101 in grade school. And so whether huge civil engineering projects like canals were going to be paid for with public money or with private money. Well, the Morris Canal promoters asked for a charter from the state of New Jersey to build a canal and asked for the state to fund their project. Well, the state said no. They were not going to fund the project. It could be they would have a charter, and they would have to sell stock, and it would have to be a privately funded project. But to grease the ways and to make it a little bit easier, they gave the canal company banking privileges. So they actually could print their own money and make loans and print stock. And so this was not exactly an unusual situation at the time. And so unfortunately, to get the amount of money required together to build the canal, a lot of speculation and a lot of money from New York investors had to be assembled, and the new company with its banking privileges immediately got itself into trouble, and so the banking privileges did not last all the way through the full time that the canal was in operation.
Well, this is New Jersey after all.
Oh, you mean politics and skullduggery? You mean here in New Jersey?
Yeah. Here's a question from faraway Bucks County from Larry. Is there a continuous path today? And is there a plan for one?
Tim?
There's not a continuous path because many of the property has been developed and it's private property now. You can make a continuous path, except you have to go, skirt it and go on roads and so on and so forth. So you can't follow the actual path all the way across the state. But there are a good number of places across the state that are publicly accessible, and you can see where the canal went, or there might still be parts of it available, or what we call assets, which are locks, inclined planes, buildings, stuff like that. But you can't follow the actual path of the canal all the way across the state.
Did how much was Lake Hopatcong dammed? How much higher did they have to raise it to make it a water impoundment for the canal?
It was 5. I believe the total that Lake Hopatcong has been raised is 12 feet. So 7 feet was for the forge back in the 1700s, and the final depth of raising was 5 feet to bring it up to the current level. So I think the Morris Canal and Banking Company owned that actual last 5 feet. So in other words, they could raise and lower it as the canal was needed.
Okay. This is more of a general question about the iron industry in the Highlands.
Oh, definitely, I'll give this to Joe.
Which was served by the canal. Where was iron ore refined? How was it refined? What did they do with the ore they pulled out of the Highlands mountains?
Iron processing in that day and age was a woodland process. You mined the ore and you smelted it in the countryside. You couldn't afford to be transporting the ore long distances, and you had to be doing that where they're close to the fuel, which was in the forest, where you could make charcoal from the trees, and close to water power, where there were streams to provide the power to operate your furnace or your forge. And so the Highlands, where there were many veins of rich magnetite iron ore, was a place where people with capital could get into the iron making business and make some good money. So there were both bloomery forges that made iron directly from the ore, made wrought iron directly from the ore, and there were blast furnaces that made pig iron from the ore, and both of those products were shipped to market on the Morris Canal. Later on, when the Morris Canal developed a transportation system into Pennsylvania, the Highlands magnetite ore was shipped in great quantities westward to iron blast furnaces that were built in the Lehigh Valley of Pennsylvania. So lots of, there were, by the 1850s and 60s, there were many, many large iron mines in the Highlands of New Jersey, shipping iron ore on the Morris Canal going west to Pennsylvania.
Okay. A former mayor of a Highlands municipality, current township committee person, wants to let you know that they just became a member of the Canal Society as a result of this presentation.
All right.
Outstanding.
And so
We love every new member.
His question is, what are the longest 2 to 3 stretches of path that is accessible to the public that they can walk on now and get an experience of the canal?
Waterloo Valley Trail, about 6 miles from Waterloo to Bilby Road. Is that about right, Tim?
How many miles did you say?
About 6, I think.
Is it? Okay, I'm surprised it's that much. But okay, yeah, that's definitely the longest.
And in Passaic County, there is Greenway Trail from Woodland Park all the way to Little Falls, and that's about 4 miles, I think. The Morris Canal Greenway project is active in many places that will be adding even more mileage. I think of the 102 miles of Morris Canal, about 44 miles are accessible to the public, but not contiguous. Shortly, soon in years to come, the Morris Canal feeder that stretched from Mountain View up to the Pompton Falls in Passaic County will become a public walking path. Then that will add another 5 miles. So stay tuned. Every year we add more. But we just partnered with Lincoln Park to add a mile or 2 of trail along the Morris Canal near incline plane number 10. And so we'll be working with them this year to add some more signage along Route 202 through Lincoln Park. And shortly there'll be a walking path all the way across Lincoln Park from the Passaic River to their plane 10 park that we opened 2 years ago. So stay tuned, and there'll be more places to walk.
Let me just add one more. In Warren County, between Breadlock Park and Stewartsville, there's a good sized trail. And that's if you want to go more rural, where all open farmland and woods and stuff like that. That's a good sized one also.
Great. Where could someone get a map of the full length of the Morris Canal? Easily.
There's a guide to the Morris Canal that was produced several years ago, but unfortunately it's out of print, and it was a private project, and we've been working to get that back into circulation, and we would like to get that up on our website, but we have not been able. We've been negotiating with the owners of that guide, and we hope shortly to be able to make that available to the public. Just not quite there yet.
Great. I guess on a Google search, there is a tab for maps, and I guess if you do a search for the Morris Canal, you might get some variety of maps. Some of them more current than others. Who built canal boats?
Canal boats were built in quite a few places along the canal. The canal company quickly realized that not enough people were going to privately build boats and run them on the canal. And so the canal company built hundreds of boats over the almost 100 years that the canal operated. And there were well over 1,000 boats running on the canal in its heyday. There was a big boatyard in Phillipsburg, and another one in Washington, and memory is failing me at this point. But there were a number of boat building locations along the canal.
Okay. How long did it take from start to finish to dig the canal? I guess the first section from Phillipsburg to Newark, and then the later it was completed to Jersey City on the Hudson. How long did it take?
Tim, you want to go that one?
Well, it was 7 years, right? Because it was the Morris Canal Banking Company was formed in 1824. The first section between Phillipsburg and Newark opened in 1831, so that's 7 years, and then another 5 years to go from Newark to Jersey City. Now, one thing I'll say about that's interesting, if you look at a map, you think, well, Newark to Jersey City isn't that far. But if you look at a map, it makes this big V down to Bayonne before it goes to Jersey City. The reason, and even though the land is flat there, the reason is that the Palisades mountain, stone went below ground there. So when they were digging the canal, they had to not only skirt mountains above ground, but also what was below. So the challenge going north to Jersey City is by that Palisades shelf that went below ground that they had to make a big V to get to Jersey City for. So that's why it took 5 years.
Gotcha.
Actually, digging the canal was a relatively easy undertaking, simple labor, digging and filling. Developing the inclined planes took a lot of time. There were no real engineering schools in this country at this time, and there was no one who really would qualify as an engineer in modern sensibilities. So the original designs for the inclined planes were developed by millwrights, people who were familiar with building water wheels and grist mills, and they were in some cases not quite up to the task. So they built the first prototype in Rockaway, and it did operate, but not really very well. And so they kept building prototypes until they kind of got something that would work well enough to get the canal started. And the canal ran with that level of technology for many years. But by the 1840s, they realized for the canal to really participate in the booming anthracite coal industry that had developed, they enlarged the canal and completely redesigned the inclined planes using the technology that appears in the pictures that we see today.
Great. How much time did it take for a canal boat to go over a typical inclined plane?
About 15 minutes.
And was the canal always wide enough that two canal boats can pass each other?
Yeah, canal was about 40 feet wide. The canal boats were 10.5 feet wide, so that left more than enough room for the two to get past. Now, one question that'll probably come up, so I'll be a little proactive here, is how did the two canal boats pass each other? Because there was a tow path on only one side of the canal. Now, typically, you had the loaded boats heading east and the light boats or empty boats heading west. Loaded boat would draw about 4.5 feet of water. The canals were only 5 feet deep. A light boat would only draw, a foot of water. So the way it worked is the loaded boat would move to the berm side or the side opposite the towpath and drop its tow line down, and then the light boat would pass over the tow line. So this was kind of a methodology that everyone who ran boats on the canal understood, and they just kind of, did it like an unwritten rule.
The rights of way.
What's that?
The rights of way.
Yeah, exactly.
Which all boaters must understand before they navigate.
Yes, exactly.
Maybe during the presentation, how long would it take for a boat to go from Phillipsburg to Jersey City or vice versa?
5 days each way. So if you're taking a load from Phillipsburg all the way to Jersey City and then back for another load, that would be 10 days total.
Okay. Well, one more question, it looks like. Interesting that the canal prototype came through Rockaway, as the first part of Route 80 that was paved was through Rockaway in the 60s. So did that road follow the path of the canal because of, I guess, some geographical features that both the canal engineers understood and the road builders of modern interstate understood as well.
No.
Okay.
The canal was operating on a whole different set of needs, and so the stretch of canal from Dover to Rockaway, where the inclined plane was being built, was selected because the section of canal, that section of canal could be fed from with water from the Rockaway River, where the canal crossed that river at Dover. So that provided the water-filled section, even if the canal was not contiguous on either side. Rockaway was also a good choice because of the iron fabrication facilities in Dover, and in Rockaway put the expertise of those fabricators immediately at hand for those people who were building this prototype inclined plane. So Rockaway was a good choice because of water and available technology.
Got you. Did the canal operate on Sundays? And which brings to another question: when was the canal not in operation while it was in operation?
It's a question. No, it did not. Sunday was the only day of the week that the canal did not operate. They worked sun up to sundown 6 days a week. They would run canal boats whenever the water wasn't frozen. So we do have pictures, photographs of canal boats running when there was snow on the ground. But once the canal froze up, obviously you couldn't run canal boats on it. So 6 days a week, pretty much 9 months out of the year, anytime that the canal was not frozen. So yeah, it was a busy operation.
But not during the night hours. The canal would close down at dark and reopen again at the crack of dawn.
Although, which is true, but nothing kept you from running at night unless you came to a lock and closed in a lock and inclined plane. So if you had a long stretch before lock and inclined plane and it got dark, I mean, there were captains said, well, hang a lander and keep going until they came to the next closed, elevation change, locker plane.
So what
Sailboats actually had a reflector board that they mounted on the front of the boat, on which they hung a Nighthawker lantern, and that would allow them to see into the distance and be able to navigate until they reached the place that they had to stop. Now, at our boat exhibit at Waterloo, if we get to open this year, one of the new additions is we've created a dashboard reflector from some of the designs we've seen at pictures of canal boats, and we've got a Nighthawker lantern, and we're going to be adding that to our new exhibit this summer.
Okay, one last question. So if the canal shut down during the winter when the canal froze up, was there a typical occupation that people involved in, that captains and crews and lock tenders and inclined plane operators did for those winter months? Or was that the time when they repaired their boats and repaired their locks and inclined plane?
Go on, Tim.
Based on what I've read in Tales of Boatmen told, there were some who worked during the winter, and it was pretty much, whoever would employ them, odd jobs. And then I read there were canalers who just wouldn't work during the winter, I guess, depending on how much they needed money. Now, one industry that took place during the winter on the canal was icing. Back then, ice cutting. Cutting ice was big business because everyone had an ice box. It was before refrigeration, and there were many good-sized basins on the canal. So that was one industry that did take place on the canal during the winter months when it was frozen, but it wasn't necessarily the canal boat captains who did it.
Great.
Lock and plane tenders lived in company housing. They worked long hours, and so they lived where they worked at their locker incline plane, and those employees got to stay in their homes through the winter months.
Right. Well, thank you, Tim and Joe, for a very educational presentation. Very interesting. We love the canal. Always like to hear about it, and hopefully this will lead to other presentations and interest in the canal. Any final thoughts?
Thank you for everyone who's joined us, and thank you, Elliot, very much for hosting this. We really appreciate it. It allows us to continue doing things as, in this time, not shutting down completely.
Great, thank you. And my thanks also to Zach Cole for helping coordinate this, and Chrissy Larson, who was monitoring and passing on the Facebook questions. Have a good night.
Thank you to everyone.
Stay
Thank
safe.
you all.